Picture this. It's Christmas Eve, year 1895. Snow drifts quietly over the Blue Ridge Mountains, and behind massive iron gates, something impossible has just been born. A house. But calling it a house is like calling the ocean a puddle. 250 rooms, 65 fireplaces, 3 kitchens. A private library so vast it could swallow small homes whole. At a time when most Americans still bathed in tin tubs, one man filled an indoor pool with 70,000 gallons of heated water. His name was George Washington Vanderbilt II, heir to one of the richest dynasties in history. But unlike the other Vanderbilts, he didn't crave power or control. He craved beauty. While his brothers built railroads, George built a dream too extravagant to exist, too remote to make sense, and too perfect to survive. They called it Biltmore, a French chateau carved into the wilderness of North Carolina. A palace so large, so ambitious, that it nearly destroyed the family who built it, because behind the marble, the gold, and the gardens, there was something darker, a slow, inevitable collapse. Most Gilded Age mansions ended the same way, abandoned, sold, demolished, forgotten. But this one didn't. It refused to die. And to understand why, you have to meet the woman who saved it. Her name was Edith Stuyvesant Dresser, and she wasn't supposed to save anything. She was supposed to marry well, host dinners, and live quietly among New York's elite. But life had other plans, because when she met George Vanderbilt, the quietest man from America's loudest family, everything changed. He wasn't like the other millionaires she knew. He didn't talk about power or profits. He talked about ideas, books, art, architecture. He spoke softly, but with conviction, and that was rare in a world built on noise. In 1898, they married in Paris. No headlines, no press, just 2 people who believed beauty was reason enough to build a life together. When Edith arrived at Biltmore for the first time, she was speechless. The endless hallways, the gardens stretching to the horizon, the smell of oak and candlelight. It was breathtaking but also terrifying, because she could see what George couldn't. The estate was magnificent, but it was bleeding money. 80 servants, thousands of acres to maintain, a dream too expensive to sustain, and she loved him too much to watch it die. That's when Edith made a decision, quiet, deliberate, and unthinkable for her time. If Biltmore was going to survive, she would have to become its guardian, the woman behind the gates, the one who would do whatever it took to protect the legacy her husband built, because while George dreamed of eternity, Edith was the one who made it real. At first, Edith tried to believe George's dream could sustain itself. That beauty alone could pay the bills. But behind the polished marble, the cracks were already spreading. Every month, the costs rose. The payroll alone, 80 servants, cooks, gardeners, stable hands, could drain a fortune in weeks. The private railway George built to carry supplies still operated, burning cash with every trip. The forests he planned to restore hadn't yet yielded profit, and the farms, meant to make the estate self-sufficient, bled money instead. The numbers didn't lie. Biltmore was collapsing, but George refused to see it. To him, the estate was a living philosophy, proof that money could build meaning. He imported new furniture from France, new art from Italy, new marble from Spain. He believed perfection was always one purchase away, and Edith watched, helpless, as the numbers turned from red to crimson. In private, their staff whispered about unpaid suppliers, delayed wages, and trains that arrived full and left empty. Some nights, the workers drank in the servants' hall, betting on how long the Vanderbilt fortune would last. 6 years? 3? Less? Then came the breaking point. In 1914, while visiting Washington, George fell ill. What should have been a simple surgery turned fatal. Within days, he was gone, 51 years old. The dreamer of Biltmore, dead before the dream was finished. The news spread across Asheville like wildfire. Flags in town were lowered to half-staff. Trains arriving at the station blew their whistles in mourning. For the workers who had spent years carving his dream from stone, it felt like the heartbeat of the estate had stopped. Inside Biltmore, the servants moved quietly through endless hallways, covering mirrors in black cloth. The great dining room sat dark. For the first time since the mansion's opening, there was no laughter, no music, only the echo of a life's work that had suddenly become a burden. Edith didn't just lose her husband, she lost her compass. The man who had dreamed the impossible was gone, and all that remained was the reality he left behind. Unpaid invoices stacked high on his desk, letters from creditors, and the crushing weight of a house too large for one person to command. She had never signed a check, never run a business, never faced the kind of decisions that now determined the fate of an empire. Yet everyone was looking at her, the widowed socialite from New York, to see what she would do. Outside, the world was changing. The economy was shifting, the Gilded Age was fading, and the very idea of inherited wealth was losing its luster. Inside Biltmore, time seemed to stop. The furnaces still burned, the staff still worked, but without George, it all felt hollow. The estate was drowning, and Edith Vanderbilt, a widow at 49, was standing on the deck of a sinking ship. She had two options: sell the largest private home in America or save it. Everyone expected the former. Even her family urged her to leave, to retreat to the safety of New York society and let the legend die with dignity. But Edith had spent her life beside a man who believed beauty was worth the fight. So she chose the impossible. When George died, most people assumed the estate would die with him. It should have. The bills alone could bury a fortune. The staff expected to be dismissed. The locals whispered that the great house on the hill would turn to dust before the decade was over. But Edith Vanderbilt wasn't ready to surrender. First, she did something no Vanderbilt had ever done. She opened the books, every expense, every debt, every unpaid bill. And what she found was shocking. Biltmore was running at a loss so massive that even a dynasty couldn't sustain it. So she began cutting, quietly, ruthlessly. Staff were dismissed. Whole wings of the mansion were closed off to save on heating. The railway that once carried marble and fine wines now sat silent. But Edith wasn't just saving money, she was saving meaning. She turned Biltmore's land into a functioning business. The farms began producing crops and dairy for sale. The forest became a managed resource. She hired one of the first trained foresters in America, Gifford Pinchot, to make the land profitable again. It worked for a while. But then the world changed again. World War I broke out. The economy shifted, and luxury was no longer fashionable. Across the country, other Gilded Age mansions were shuttering, sold for scraps, demolished for apartments and parking lots. Biltmore should have followed, but Edith refused. In 1930, during the depths of the Great Depression, she made a move that shocked the entire country. She opened America's largest private home to the public. For $1, anyone could walk through the grand halls where presidents had dined. The same rooms that had once hosted royalty now opened their doors to farmers, teachers, and families escaping the bleakness of the Depression. It was unthinkable. A Vanderbilt mansion turned tourist attraction. High society mocked her. Newspapers called it desperate, but it worked. That one decision saved everything. The estate earned enough to stay alive, and more importantly, it became a symbol. A reminder that beauty, even when born from excess, could survive if someone was brave enough to adapt. But saving something that big never lasts forever. Because survival isn't permanent, it's rented, paid for in sacrifice. For years, Biltmore's doors stayed open. The crowds came. The money trickled in. But the cracks beneath the surface never disappeared. By the late 1932, the estate was bleeding again. The Great Depression dragged on, and Edith had to sell tens of thousands of acres to the federal government land that would later become Pisgah National Forest. It was a painful trade, survival for scale. Then came World War II. The tourists vanished, gas was rationed, and once again, the Vanderbilt fortune seemed ready to collapse. This time, Edith made a different kind of deal. The National Gallery of Art sent its most valuable paintings, masterpieces by Raphael, Rembrandt, and Botticelli, to be hidden inside Biltmore's stone walls. The safest vault in America was now a mansion in the mountains. But outside those walls, the world was changing. Servants were disappearing. The cost of maintaining the house grew unbearable, and Edith's daughter, Cornelia, the heir to it all, wanted nothing to do with it. She left America, divorced her husband, and never returned. The estate that George built and Edith saved was left without an heir who wanted it. The great rooms still shimmered, the gardens still bloomed, but the spirit that had once filled the estate was gone. And yet again, it didn't end there, because a new generation stepped in. William Cecil, Edith's grandson, took the ruins of a fortune and turned them into something the Vanderbilts had never managed before: a business. He built a winery on the land, opened hotels, and turned Biltmore into what it had always secretly been, a vision too large for one lifetime, carried by every generation that refused to let it die. William's vision worked, slowly at first, then all at once. The abandoned halls filled again with voices, the gardens with laughter. What began as a desperate attempt to preserve family history became a thriving enterprise visited by more than 1 million people a year. But William wasn't chasing profit. He was chasing permanence, the same dream that had driven his grandfather to build a palace in the wilderness, and his grandmother to fight for it when everyone else walked away. He understood something most of the Gilded Age never did. Survival isn't about holding on to the past. It's about adapting without losing your soul. So he did what every generation of Vanderbilts had failed to do before he turned legacy into longevity. The estate became self-sustaining. The winery grew into one of the most visited in America. The hotels brought new life to the grounds. And yet, through it all, the heart of Biltmore never changed. The same limestone walls, the same grand staircase, the same mountain view George Vanderbilt first fell in love with. Today, Biltmore is still owned by his descendants. The last great house of the Gilded Age still standing not as a museum, but as a living story. Proof that some dreams are too big to fade and some houses refuse to die. Because the secret of Biltmore was never money. It was an obsession. A century of stubborn faith that beauty, once created, deserves to endure. From George's vision, to Edith's courage, to William's reinvention, every generation paid a price to keep the impossible alive. Too big to fail? Maybe. But more than that, it was too beautiful to let go. Stand on the front lawn of Biltmore today, and it's hard to believe any of it was ever in danger. The limestone glows golden at sunset. The air smells faintly of oak and rain. Tourists pose on the same steps where presidents once stood. Most of them don't know how close it came to disappearing, how many times the lights nearly went out. But that's the secret. Biltmore was never just a house. It was a test of wealth, of will, of whether beauty can survive in a world that constantly forgets to value it. Every mansion of the Gilded Age eventually crumbled, broken by time, taxes, or neglect. Every one except this one. Because while the others were built to show power, Biltmore was built to show vision. And vision, it turns out, lasts longer. So when you look at those carved stone towers rising from the mist, remember, this wasn't luck. It wasn't even a legacy. It was survival, bought again and again by people who refused to let history win. The Gilded Age is long gone. But in the mountains of North Carolina, one dream still stands, and its light hasn't gone out yet.